This video was created by VinylicPuma of VinylicPumaGaming.
What is up, VPG Nation? I'm your host, VinylicPuma. Let's get right into the countdown! Now, before I rip off any more YouTubers, let's just go ahead and get into this friggin' video. So a couple weeks back, I made a video talking about buffs for some of the weapons that you can use in Fallout 4, and a viewer on that video asked that I should make one for Borderlands 2. More specifically, a serious video, unlike some of the other two that I made, where I said that guns like the Devastator needed to be nerfed, and guns like the Norfleet needed to be buffed. Now, for the most part, while I'll be discussing specific weapons in this video, 3 of the 7 things I'm going to be talking about encompass entire weapon rarities, or even certain types of weapons. And yes, if you're curious, I am going to be talking about how to fix ETech weapons, and if you're here for buffs on the pre-sequel, I think you'll find that some of the buffs I'll be suggesting here could also apply to some of the weapons in Borderlands the pre-sequel. So before I spoil anything else here, these are going to be the top 7 bad guns and weapons that need a buff in Borderlands 2. Speaking of ETech, that's going to be number 7. So while I would say that ETech launchers are okay for the most part, assault rifles, shotguns, pistols, and sniper rifles could all use a buff. And while I would say that SMGs are alright for the most part, I wouldn't mind seeing the same buff applied to them as well. Now, the biggest problem with ETech weapons once you get out of both normal and even true Vault Hunter mode is that ETechs have lower critical modifiers and consume too much ammo per shot. It's also worth mentioning that shotguns and pistols can't crit at all, meaning they're inferior to weapons that can crit, which is about 99% of the other weapons that are in Borderlands 2. So here's vaguely what I would do for each weapon type. So for assault rifles, I'd first match the critical hit modifiers with ETech SMGs, and maybe I'd match the damage somewhat as well. For pistols and shotguns, I give them a 5 to 10% chance to randomly crit enemies, because normally they can't crit, and then also reduce their ammo consumption per shot. And then for sniper rifles, I'd match the critical hit modifiers with non-Jacob sniper rifles, because right now the critical hit damage on an ETech sniper rifle is somehow lower than that of a purple rarity sniper rifle, which doesn't make sense to me. And for SMGs, assault rifles, and sniper rifles, I would reduce ammo consumption per shot on all of them, and I would probably decrease the magazine size slightly, maybe by no more than 25%. This way, you get ETech weapons that are better than weapons of purple rarity, but they're not way far and beyond that purple rarity is entirely useless. Another thing that I think they could do to balance everything out is if they could make Jacob's ETech weapons and then Torg ETech weapons. And really, if you mess around with like Cheat Engine and Gib Save Editor, you'll find that you can actually create a lot of these guns already. It's just a matter of getting them to stay on your game. So let's go ahead and get into number 6, and that is going to be assault rifles, and more specifically, assault rifles with the Torg barrel. Now, while all assault rifles in general should be more on par with both pistols and SMGs in terms of critical hit modifiers, Torg barrel assault rifles are especially bad. And these include guns like the Jacob's Cannon, the Dahl Grenadier, the Torg Torpedo, the Bandit Rockets, and the Vladov Rocketeer as some of our non-unique weapons, and even some unique weapons like the Jacob Stinkpot, the Torg Kerblaster, the Dahl Bearcat, and especially the horridly horrible Torg Boom Puppy. The biggest problem with a lot of these weapons is they don't get bonuses from grenade damage, and they can't perform critical hits on enemies. While this isn't such a big deal in normal or true Vault Hunter mode, because the damage is high enough, it makes these guns worthless once you hit Ultimate Vault Hunter mode. Some of these weapons also have ridiculous ammo consumption. The one that comes to mind in particular is the Bearcat, which is mostly just bad because of its ridiculously high ammo consumption. And for most assault rifles, you're getting about 1 to 2 ammo consumed per shot. The Bearcat is like 6 ammo per shot, and it's absolutely ridiculous. And really, I'd probably do the same fixes that I would do for ETechs. Maybe I'd give like torque-barreled assault rifles a 5 to 10% chance to randomly crit, and then half the ammo consumption on all of them. So if you were consuming 6 ammo before, you're now consuming 3. If you're consuming 4 ammo per shot, you're now consuming 2. And if you're consuming like 2 ammo per shot, you're going down to 1 ammo per shot. And I think that would really help out all of these weapons in general. Number 5. Pearlescent Weapons. So a lot of the Pearlescent weapons are weaker than many of the legendaries that you can acquire in Borderlands 2. Now, while there are a few Pearlescents that are good, like the Avenger, the Butcher, Sawbar, and Becca, really, the rest are just mostly bad. And I think we can all agree that the Storm, Bearcat, Unforgiven, Tunguska, Godfinger, Wanderlust, and Carnage range from being like mediocre to awful. Now, I would propose one of 2 different buffs for Pearlescent weapons in general. The first would involve random crits. A 20 to 30% chance to randomly perform a critical hit would make certain weapons like the Wanderlust, the Bearcat, Storm, and Tunguska much better weapons for the player to use. Now, the second suggestion would be to make Pearlescent weapons scale in strength as your player character increases in level. So if you have a sick Pearlescent that you get at level 51, you can use it until level 72. Either way, I think Gearbox could justify making these Pearlescent weapons much rarer than their legendary counterparts, as the Pearlescent weapons would be truly better and infinitely more useful than most legendary weapons, just depending on whether they decided to do random crits or whether they decided to do like the scaling level thing that I suggested. Number 4, the Patriot. So I know this is a popular weapon with some people, and I do think that they are right to like it in a certain sense. However, the Patriot is really inaccurate on most characters. Even with Zero's precision skill at 10 out of 5, it's still really difficult to score critical hits with this weapon. And while you're aiming down the scope, projectiles almost seem to like swerve around enemies sometimes. Now, really the Patriot could be fixed by simply improving its accuracy, something that I think should be done to many of the Seraph weapons that were included with the Captain Scarlet and her Pirate's Booty DLC. Another thing Gearbox could do is make the projectiles a little bit faster, because between the accuracy and the slow projectile speed, you can't snipe anything at a considerable difference. And this is yet another thing that would improve all of the Seraph weapons from the Captain Scarlet DLC. Number 3, the Chulainn. So the Chulainn is a weapon that I actually really like. It's a good weapon to use on Gage, and would also be pretty decent on characters like Axton or Maya, provided you're using the B shield. And unlike the Florentine, the Chulainn has a pretty good ammo consumption as well. Maybe it's just me, but it also seems like I have a much easier time slagging enemies with the Chulainn than I do with the Florentine. Now, obviously, if you are familiar with this gun, you'll know that the Chulainn has self-slag, which pretty much breaks the gun's viability in almost all of the difficulties in Borderlands 2. And really the obvious fix here is going to be to simply remove that self-slag and otherwise leave the gun alone. Maybe if you wanted to do an additional fix, what would be interesting is if you could have this thing come in not just slag element, but also fire and corrosive elements. That way you could mix fire and shock, corrosive and shock, and then slag and shock, and have that kind of different mechanic going on. And I think that would be really powerful and would be really interesting for players to use. Number 2, the Madhouse. Something that I've always thought was retarded was that the Madhouse doesn't work with Gage's close enough skill. It would be sick to have like 600 anarchy stacks and have a stray bullet from the Madhouse hit an enemy. Otherwise, the Madhouse is pretty much worthless. The projectile physics are unpredictable, and while its special effect, where it ricochets and then splits into 2 bullets, is cool, it's almost impossible to get those projectiles to even hit anything, unless you're inside, and even then, it's still pretty difficult. So like I kind of mentioned before, This weapon, the Madhouse, should be compatible with Gage's Close Enough skill, because I think that would make the Madhouse infinitely more useful than it currently is. And maybe another cool fix would be to remove the bullet swerving entirely. That way, if you shoot the Madhouse directly at an enemy, there isn't a chance for the bullets to miss due to all of the swerving. And one more fix would be for the elemental versions, you could increase the status effect chance. Maybe if you boosted the status effect chance by 20 to 30%, it might make the gun a little bit better as well. Because not only are you getting all those projectiles that will occasionally hit with Close Enough, you're also getting the ability to cause greater stat effects that add to a little bit more damage, and in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, you can counteract some of the enemy's health regen that way. Number 1, the Cradle. Okay, so I know that this isn't a gun, but the Cradle is another worthless item in Borderlands 2. It's essentially a legendary shield with low capacity that when depleted, it deploys a small copy of itself forward in an attempt to deal damage. And according to the Borderlands wiki, quote, a level 50 Cradle will only deal about 5,000 damage. So the buff that I would give to the Cradle would be to increase the damage of that deployed copy. If it dealt the amount of damage that, say, the fastball does, I think that alone would make the Cradle a shield that's worthy of many players' consideration in their builds. It would also be pretty cool if on Axton, that same damage dealt by the copied shield was enhanced through grenade damage bonus. And otherwise, maybe you could buff its capacity by 25%, and maybe like Borderlands the Pre-Sequel's Not Shield, also made by Tediore, you could give the Cradle 0 shield recharge delay. And then at that point, the deployed grenade would only deploy if the Cradle fully recharges. Anyway guys, that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, and as always, take care and I'll see y'all next time.